And I think we left off on exhibit 7, we go back into exhibit 8. So, I'm going to do what's not this protection to exhibit 8. I'm sorry. Yeah, 35, sir. So we're let's talk about the space matters. Mr. Glass, could you please state your spell your name for the record?
James Mark Glass, spelled M-A-R-C.
And I just handed you protect me to exhibit 20 cases. And can you identify that document, please?
This is my curriculum.
And could you please tell us about your education?
I received an undergraduate degree in pursued master's studies, not take a master's degree in university. Graduate environmental science, graduate studies, research science.
And what has been your career history after you graduated?
Since 1999, I've been involved in professional consulting, site assessment.
And what do you currently do at Downstream Strategy?
Downstream strategies.
And you also sit on boards for your community, is that right?
I do, I'm on a larger region board, institute, which is
And could you please tell us a little bit about the research you've done?
research I've done related to this is primarily reviewing literature.
And how many times have you testified as an expert in court proceedings? And are there, I'm sorry.
I probably couldn't name the courts off the top of my head, but I've testified in federal court 2 times in sure.
And there are several matters on your sheet that are particularly relevant to this matter. Could you please walk through those?
Well, particularly what I do. So that's the things that is there. Scientific analysis, the first one. More specifically, as similar areas. Here, this topic is that similar types of areas. And it's well.
And what would you say your percentage of work is that pertains to oil and gas operations? What is the rest?
I do. So, to where they for an applicant seeking liability protections under the state.
And so as part of your experience, would you agree that you review applications and at some point maybe even visit the site in order to prepare your reviews or expert testimony?
Yes, it's very.
And what would you describe as your environmental due diligence experience that would be applicable to this project?
Well, I guess environmental due diligence typically refers to research. So in this case, it's necessary.
And do you represent applicants as well as
Yes.
objectors? For Deputy T, would like to offer Mr. Glass as an expert in environmental monitoring and remediation, soil and groundwater contamination and remediation, air monitoring, and environmental due diligence.
Yeah, but like before. Mr. Glass, if I understood your testimony correctly, and we're prepared for your testimony tonight, you reviewed literature based on permitting and site issues. Did I understand that correctly?
I don't think I said that. That's not my session.
Oh, well, that's what I took down. So let me ask you, did you review any literature in connection with your testimony that you plan to hear tonight?
Yes, I definitely reviewed literature. I reviewed studies from the University of Pittsburgh. I reviewed research studies. Tools that are able to certain positions.
What is that data crunching study that you're referring to? You didn't provide it to us with the board, sorry. You have a report? Have you prepared a report? You intend to prepare a report?
Wait, like to get back to
You mentioned you looked at health studies, you're not a toxicologist, correct? You're not an epidemiologist, correct?
correct.
And you're not a medical professional.
Correct. The studies I reviewed with the University of Pittsburgh. Just
Have you ever been involved in reviewing a zoning permit for any facility of any type?
sure.
But because you can't do the example, you can tell us what type of facility that was.
Oh, they were all certain conditions.
But what type of conditions that was?
No, it's
So it was some kind of commercial spot where drilling operations are going to be headquartered on. And how about any permits that you've ever reviewed? And when I say reviewed, I mean given some sort of opinion in connection with any permits issued to the Pennsylvania DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. Their permits submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Have any of those been for compressor stations? Have any of the permits that you've reviewed been for compressor stations?
sure.
Did you review the complete application to the zoning hearing board in this case?
I believe so. I reviewed the two.
You mentioned that you did some air monitoring in terms of radio nuke lines in an industrial site. As I understand it, it's a facility that had radioactive material stored at the facility and they were demolished. Is that correct? That was not a compressor station. You did air sampling 48 hours at a residence close to a fracking operation. That was not a compressor station, correct?
That wasn't correct. I did multiple rounds. It was actually for 7 weeks. I did consecutive sessions. Samples. 8-hour samples. Times capture time. 7 stages. It wasn't just a fracking samples. No, it was not. Construction.
It was an unconventional well pad. And you looked at air monitoring all phases of it, not just the fracking. But it was not. And where was that oil gas facility or a conventional well you did that monitor?
That was in West Virginia.
And when did you do that?
2000.
Is that for a confidential client or you can tell us? who that's?
Good job. It was for a private.
Information, did you review with respect to, I think you said, inline pipeline gas, your words?
I read literature studies that some of it was as well as individual concentrations.
What kind of pipelines were these?
So unconventional.
They were not compressor station.
Pipelines.
But you're telling me that all this data that you looked at, you're sure it all related to pipelines coming from a gas well to the compressor station and then gas going out of the compressor station as well. And all of the literature that you looked at or the study that were all those things. But you can't tell me the study.
I just can't remember the names of these studies. I can go do it if you want to. Sure.
And when you said you've done a lot of work on spills and releases, have you ever done any work on spills or releases out of the compressor station? And
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
and you said that 20% of your work is in the oil and gas area. Has any of that work, that 20% work, been in association with a compressor station?
But let's be clear here about, let's say, a compressor station versus which. Types of contaminants, or what's released.
So you're
What's happening with the wellhead is similar, except during the pre-production phases on the well pad.
So you're telling me that it's your belief that the same potential contaminants, the same potential constituents that are used for the drilling operation are the same constituents that are at the compressor stations?
Now, with regard to the gas production, production has to be site. Pressure stations.
Well, you would agree with me that Your work,
Including your emissions.
your work about spills was not work about spills of gas. That's the physical possibility, right?
Well, to some, it is the releases of gas. Produce
But when you're working on remediation, what you're testifying to of the soil with respect to spills and releases, that remediation is with respect to release of gas.
No, it's related to the contaminants. But also,
When you talked about due diligence, you said that typically due diligence is thought of as a practice you engage in if a buyer is gonna buy a particular property that might have some environmental issue, they have someone to do diligence before they do that. Typically, that's the
due diligence has a meaning under CERCLA, and that's the way that people do too. So under CERCLA, due diligence. First, define since under CERCLA, you can see diligence also. CERCLA. CERCLA is the comprehensive environmental response. Comprehensive act.
some of the work that you've done in connection with oil and gas, not compressor stations, but oil and gas, has been funded by an organization, Scott, correct?
Mr. Sweeney, so Jack, we're going beyond 4 years, at some point it's cross examination, I'm not sure how much longer we can sit on this process.
Ted, are there questions? I have asked questions. Yes.
Of course. I'm happy to reserve those questions for cross-examination. At this time, though, based on this witness's testimony, I would object to him being proffered as an expert to testify with respect to either compressor stations generally or this compressor station in particular. Because it's clear he doesn't have experience or expertise with respect to the compressor station.
Yes. Consider that experience.
Mr. Wax, I am going to, I'm sorry if the application is kind of large. We wanted it to be on the computer here, but. Oh, sorry, that's my daughter's artwork. And this is just the first page, but do you recognize that? I'm gonna hand you a copy of the application then that already has the base numbers. Oh, Mr. Sweeney, that's what I put up on your. Yeah. It's the same application, all I did was base number them so we could have some semblance of organization.
Mark, one of these copies, it's.
I'm sorry, again, Mr. Glass, you did review the application, is that correct? And we'll get into more detail, but what was your overall impression of the application?
I believe that it responds to. Sections. Sections. I did definitely have some concerns as a practitioner. Both in areas where it's actually demonstrated that it didn't get the special exemption.
And we'll start with the project narrative, which is on page number 7.
Supposed to be reading on the screen, so I can.
No, you know what, we'll have to forego that. Do you have a copy of the application? Because that's what that is. Well, I just thought the base numbers would be helpful.
Referencing. Straight special session. Just. Now it's established.
That's perfect.
And Mr. Glass, in this project, in the project narrative, what was your understanding of what was going to be located on the facility? On the property?
Things that I was concerned.
And we'll go to. We'll skip that since it's a little bit right now. And did you think that there were going to be produced water tanks on the property?
Yes,
And what is typically found in produced water?
used water is a complex mixture, obviously. It's itself. It's typically high C. So.
So maybe we'll step back.
I'm sorry. Just point out the chat and then strike this. He's clearly responding to a question and telling us about what's in produced water coming from the well pad. We hear about the compressor station, not about produced water from the well pad.
The proposed application is for produced water tanks to be stored on the property with a compressor station. So the approval, I mean, if Ms. Condo wants to remove the produced water tanks from the project, that would be separate, but
Talking about the tanks. Compressor station. Parks. Like, just water, gas comes to the compressor station.
that's correct. Yes.
And I believe that there's prior testimony clarified it need be yet again. But there's prior testimony that the produced water in those produced water tanks is the water being pulled out of the compressor station gas. It's not produced water being stored there well yet. There's already been testing about
I don't get the flavor that's what he was talking about, just water tanks that are part of the operation of the compressor station. If he wants to say it's the same thing that comes out of the well when it comes to the compressor station. So I'm gonna.
So I'm actually, let's go back for a second. You,
Yes, that. Talking about produced water compressor station. Say it's identical to what's coming out of the well at the compressor station, or there's just similar. Produced water. Is that compressor station?
I'm gonna hand you what legal markets protect PT exhibit. Are we out of time in this or something?
Yes.
Exhibit 10. And Mr. Glass, do you recognize this exhibit? And have you read that study?
Yes. 2020.
And does this exhibit detail the chemicals that the EPA have identified as being associated with hydraulic fracturing operation?
That report does, yes.
And is there anything that you would disagree with in that report?
Or to be more of a question.
I'll withdraw the question. So, going back to the question of what is produced water, if we can back up and maybe tell the board how produced water is actually created from start to finish.
Produced water from the pad or
Well, I think it would be helpful to know what the product is from the beginning and to know how it moves through to the compressor station and how it's leaving the compressor station.
will produce water to help you understand how it's going to happen. Um, it may be relevant in the sense that it describes where some of the things that come out of the contaminants, constituents that are included in produced water also end up in train gas. Methane, which is what we think is natural gas, and the other constituents that are in train. There's some, they all come up together. Some of that separates into the liquid phase, some of that is the gas phase. So discussion of that is just
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you could answer the question better than I thought.
But
So the produced water, mostly water, salty, what next?
Well, produced water that comes out of the well. So from the time the well is drilled, actually, really any time you have casing, pressure from the formation, fluids can come up. In that case, prior to that well fracture, it would just be representative of chemistry. Shift. Geological constituents. So that was all of those things. Last good, just kind of imagine that. Toss about how Sure, so let's just say petroleum hydrocarbons. Then the hydrofracturing process, which is water is pressure.
I'm sorry, it's glass water or what else is pushed through the formation of body water?
Right, sorry, yeah, so there are chemical mixtures, additives, added to it, that are basically creating a recipe that's specific to the formation. Who desire properties of water to do a better job at penetrating the formation and carrying product to which is a good thing. Substance. All of those things are injected, and what comes back out of the well is for some period of time a mixture of what was injected along with what's already there. To pressurize the pressure. It's boost it's all the gas flow back to the surface. It's roughly a ratio of 10 units of goods come back for every unit of gas. So if you use the gas, get 10 barrels. So that's kind of the ratio. So there's a lot of this. Gradually, over time, chemistry changes.
I'm sorry, real quick, let me ask, how do radionuclides end up in the big spot?
Sure. So those are already present in the geologic formations. So that's childhood. The result of weathering processes that basically left those things behind. And they were buried for years and years. And they're there because they're water soluble, and the water formation has to add extra water to its formation. Protect soluble things.
And Mr. Glass, as part of your review and research and preparation for your testimony, I'm going to hand you what you mark as Protect PT exhibit number 11. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this is the documents.
And can you read the title of the document, please?
Unconventional oil and gas development and ambient particle radioactivity.
And what does this study? Could you explain this study to the board?
What this study looked at is how to measure, quantify emissions of conventional oil and gas reservoirs for production, as well as conventional gas production. What the air emissions were in terms of particulates. So brief discussion of particulates, if you understand. Talk a little bit about gases that can be air, so everybody has that concept of what gases are. But there's also particulates, and in particular, fine particulates. Here, about the use of ultrafine particulate, and really all that's referring to is the size of particles that are defined regulatory purposes, specific size fractions. Down to 10 microns and down to 2.5 microns and below. And what that talks about is the size of the particles, which are significant because they bypass our natural process to differentiate between solids and gases. And it just provides means that particles of those sizes, when inhaled, can pass directly through the tissue and bloodstream. So it's a little bit of an over exaggeration, but it's a lot closer than having an intravenous injection. Those contaminants that taking that back just means it's hard.
That being how smaller that is.
Well, 10 microns, 2.5, so those are size that we use for the regulations.
Okay.
Those particles that size are ultraviolet particles, which is the 2.5 that actually do as it goes. It's better than positions. It doesn't necessarily tell you that the position of that. Just because it's that small, it's passes.
So I'm going to move to the application now, to page 32. That's the big And just one follow-up question, the chemicals that we today listed on the exhibit that we just looked at, would you agree that those chemicals are some of the chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing? No, not yet. Sorry, you can't put that away yet, yeah. So, page 32 is the, Hyperion air quality study, is that right? And what did you find notable about the report?
Well, the what it covers is it covers a portion of its that's what's obviously. That's not it. It's just. So that, and then the conclusion, that it was protected. And I just find that a untrue statement, because it doesn't actually provide a characterization of what's in it. It talks about the federal regulatory.
And when you say it doesn't characterize everything that would be present, are you speaking about pollutants?
Correct. Because it talk about the constituents.
And was there any discussion of radionuclide in that report?
This report, our study,
Yeah. And did the report mainly rely on modeling?
what the report relies is on is the EPA, which is this certain constituents from certain types of maximum flow rate, which type of actions.
And were there any baseline studies provided in the air report, actual baseline air testing that was done on or around the property?
By baseline, you mean sampling prior pre-construction to get prior construction event, not as discussed in this report.
And when we talk about whether or not there would be impacts, would you agree that you need a baseline in order to measure an impact?
Well, there's lots of ways to do it. That's the best way is to actually measure the conditions prior to completion. Operation is completely static. It's captures that. It should also, those ups and downs should also consider that the highest level is averages.
And does this report identify a method by which the impacts could be measured? Either from baseline or what you just described?
It just talks about the
And would you agree that the air study only included one of the well sites that is going to be located on the same property? And so you would agree that the air report doesn't include the eventual emissions that will be coming from the second well pad, is that correct?
Correct.
And did the air study include any discussion of cumulative effects from, well, not from the second well, but from the adjacent landfill? Was there any discussion of the air quality next to the landfill?
There's no measurement. Application.
And I'm going to ask you a question about Westmoreland County and its ozone standard. And were you aware that that Westmoreland County is in marginal non-attainment for the 8-hour ozone standard?
Yes, that's indicated.
And what does that mean?
That means that it exceeds the ozone standards. So it's through.
And the report speaks about attainment for particulate matter as well. And it's a marginal non-attainment for the particulate matter as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was 2006 standard. But marginal unattainment is over attainment levels. It's not still raised the buckets.
And it's in marginal non-attainment for particular matters 2.5. And was that what we were discussing before, the size of the particulate matter?
Correct.
And so what is particulate matter 2.5?
Particulate matter 2.5 is particles, solid particles, or liquids, and are 2.5 microns in size. The reference that came here, I think, is about 60 microns. There. So 2.5 microns is much smaller than you can see with a microscope. That's the
Now, the section also, the report also states that the project is an attainment for other criteria for pollutants. But isn't it correct that not all pollutants are identified?
Correct. There are constituents, there are components of additions from types such as facilities, infrastructure. Except perhaps your total hazardous air pollutants. My understanding from the time that I reviewed this report is that includes the hazardous air pollutants, which are covered with federal regulation, that those levels are or we can characterize the gas with the waste stream themselves.
And what does that abbreviation stand for? We already discussed it. Sorry, it was on my question. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So no, you're fine. Now we can go back to the air study that we handed out. And you can start from the beginning on that, if you wouldn't mind, to help the board understand that study.
Okay, this is the study again. study that we talked about. Which again, this was interesting to me. The way that I was looking at to try to measure components that felt not measured in the study. The scale is very different. The air study by our experienced consultant. This study, the unconventional gas development and particle radioactivity looks at data from all across the country in areas where conventional gas geology are being commercially developed. So it's in Texas.
If we could move to page 3. And the map, which I found really very interesting. What does this map denote?
Well, if you look at the legend, bottom left, it's just a note that the United States has this symbology that's used. So OG, RadNet monitors, stands for red gas, RadNet monitors, and other RadNet monitors. What RadNet is our national system for monitoring for radio declines. It goes back 30 days. All part of the country is being able to detect releases from we detected things from Fukushima, Yachi reactor meltdown. We can detect those with this type of thing. So it's the way that our country monitors what's happening internally. Something's going on with the power plant. It's talking about. There needs to be a way to look at that. If something's happening in the country, intentionally or accidentally, that way. So that's where this, all of the orange is. But the orange triangles that are surrounded by black is ones that happen to be located within 20 kilometers of gas. See that they're distributed. There's several in our area. There's only really one that's really close to.
You mean a monitor?
What these monitors were used for is a way to measure all across the country through relationships between other permitted ways and radiation. More specifically, to be able to tell a particular matter, even more specifically, radioactive. So that's a really powerful tool because you can do those spatial relationships. That's what I say it's big data. It's using large state databases, the Pennsylvania database, Texas. States have databases about permitted wells where they're located. That can be correlated with the radiation readings, each types of things, and different types of data that are available to this radiation station. In this case,
And so tell us why we should care about radon and radioactivity. That would be.
well, we talked about particulate matter. It's a size. Said that it's just that. It's just a reference to the size. It doesn't tell you. Can make so understanding particulate matter that's radioactive, the fact that it talks about the way small particles can be inspired to take it into the body, and the nature by which radioactive particulates continue to radiation, how they release that energy.
And could you describe the process? I'm sorry, the studies that you've done or that you've read that deal with the emission of radon and what happens to radon after it's emitted from facilities like this?
So most of us are familiar with the idea of radon gas. It's a gas that comes from geologic origin. It's part of the decay process. Radium, specifically closely. So radium is a metal, it's radioactive, it changes.
So I think we can keep it pretty
Those are
general
all-
so we can understand. If they want to ask more specific questions at some point, they can, right?
There is some relevance there. That's what I might do it. Gamma emissions are energy that are released. It's just pure energy, similar but the same concept. Similar to X-rays. So that's just a pure energy wave. But the other ones are particles. The reason I think that's is because alpha particles and beta particles are literally ejected from the nucleus as projectiles. They have mass because they're particles. So particle is a projectile. What happens is big health concern. Radon gas itself is a health concern. It's not breathe it in. Radioactive decay happens inside your body. Direct proximity to where those bullets are directly proximate to tissue. And that can happen each time those emissions occur, each time there's a radioactive degradation.
And what's the half-life? First, can you describe to the board what a half-life is?
Half-life is time it takes for initial half-life for radon is 3 days. So origin is uranium and things that are in soil and ground. There's something else that came to the surface and got to the surface in 3 days. Radon gas that we have. In 3 days.
And what happens to radon after it's released, after it's emitted?
Well, radon is a gas. It's a noble gas. It doesn't react. It's just by itself. So the way it dissipates is through radioactive decay. Because its half-life is relatively short, there's something way faster than just seconds. But half-life of radium just kind of push days. So there's a big difference, but that speaks to the activity of how many of those radioactive decays happen. So radon is pretty radioactive. That happens by alpha emissions. Then once the alpha emission happens, all of the one atom of radon is now something else. And a series of things. Each time it changes to a different element. There's position. Some multiple elements. So ultimately, stable.
So does that mean, thinking about half-life, 3.8 days, that in 3.8 days, the radon is quote unquote gone, but it transformed into something else? Is that a layperson way to describe it?
Yes.
Okay. And what else was important about this study that you think is relevant to this project?
Well, a couple of things. Number one is that they're really able to do this. It's really interesting typically. But what is really interesting is, I think it's table 3, is they were able to associate, because of the locations of those monitors, the locations of wells, they were able to associate specifically radioactive airborne particulates with proximity to wells. They've got statistic relationships in many of the active gas shale plays, including the Marcellus region and the Bakken Niobrara, and the Permian Haynesville Basin in Texas. All of those show statistically significant correlation to proximity to those. Basically, what they found is the levels in table 3, the amount of increase in radioactive particulate matter, and associated with an additional number of wells within 20 kilometers. So that's at 100 wells there. Being have wells, this is changed.
And do you think it was significant, the difference between the results for the Marcellus Utica and the other regions?
Well, I'm most concerned personally about associated because that's where I care about it.
Fair enough, fair enough.
But all of these regions showed correlations, which I mean totally makes sense because, like I said, it's well known that the contaminants of these radionuclides are present in the subsurface. It's well known that they come onto the surface as a product. It's well known that they're not necessarily so they don't end up ideally being delivered to customers. So they anywhere they can be gotten rid of, less than it's not part of the system. So I always wondered where does all that go because the quantities, just because the quantities of what's quantities of gas, the quantities of water, all these ways that are getting those contaminants to the surface, it's a very significant mass quantity. If you have a contaminant that's even a fraction of that, because the quantities are so big, so I'm just wondering itself, what is I understand all that mass goes when you bring it to the surface. This helps us understand.
And Jasper,
I mean, radon gas is liberated at the well pads, it's liberated from almost every part, even in our homes. Turn on the gas burner, there's radon particulates out there. It's out there inside the home, radioactive case. That amount has been tested and identified. Studies have been done in such a because of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection doing studies. They looked at that. It's known, evidence is there. That's a different scale than we're seeing these air emissions from these well pads, pressure stations. That's what it's.
and we're going to move on to what you're going to mark as protected so that we're on number 12. And Mr. Glass, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Could you tell us what this is?
This is a research article titled Hazardous Air Pollutants and Transmission Pipeline Natural Gas.
And did you review this study?
I did.
And do you rely on this study?
Yes.
And what does this study, what can you tell the board about this study and sort of layperson terms that would help them understand how it relates to this project?
So it provides analytical data, testing, laboratory analysis, chemical makeup of the stream of constituents that are natural gas components. And other phases of the production. If you look at table 1 provides a list of contaminants found specifically in the pipeline. So this isn't necessarily it's actually what's present at samples collected from in the pipeline transmission concentration. You'll see the usual suspects, enzymes, all that, and of course radon. not remarkable, it's going to be there, but what's nice about this is a temporary measure.
And what do you mean by a more contemporary measure?
It's newer, I think this is based on data from 2012, 2002. And most of the other information I sort of older and similar geologic scales, but not in the scale that we've been. That's 10 years. It's that scales. Gas positions.
And we'll try to move on, but is there anything else very notable about this study that you'd like the board to know? Besides the fact that it contains updated research?
No, I'd just like to point out that if the ones about it, they're radioactive constituents, and keeps into containing.
For the end, we left the board in our protected exhibit number 13. And Mr. Glass, have you reviewed this study?
Yes.
And can you identify what this study is?
This is identified as a policy paper. To me, this isn't is analytical or academic in the sense it's not analytic, but it's more of a summary of the issues that communities deal with when dealing with compressor stations. It's based on public health survey, literature. So you understand. What problem?
And what did you find notable about this study?
Well, that there's a combination of both measurable and perceived health outcomes and stresses associated with this infrastructure. Build-out of it, there are data gaps that create a sense of certainty. Lives, there's distress. This makes recommendations about some of the ways to address that uncertainty. Just basically.
And what are some of those things?
There are many. Part of it is collecting better data. That's something that's really important because you don't always know the answer to questions, but certainly itself can be stressful. One of my great joys is to look for something and I don't want to be there and find out it's not there. That's very reassuring. I think that's other people. It's sharing that certainty is good as a practitioner. But if you just be able to engineer the attitude, it can be measured, it can be managed. If it's not measured, it can't manage it. So measuring is the first step.
And I'm going to ask you about your work on your municipal level work. And when in your work in your zoning hearing board appeals, what would you think would be helpful for this? What would you want to know sitting on your zoning hearing board?
This sounds pretty self-realizing.
I'm sorry, I would object to that. I don't think that the question is what he would want from a defined zoning hearing board with some undefined code and ordinance compared to what and we have here the zoning boards to consider, which is on which he obviously doesn't sit.
Okay, we'll circle back around to that. I'm going to hand you what we're going to mark as protect BT exhibit number 14. Can you identify what this is to the board, please?
This is the public.
I'm sorry, before he answers that, I need to propose an objection. This is a PowerPoint from a presentation given by the University of Pittsburgh. It's not a published study, but beyond that, it's epidemiology, health research. And this expert has not only not been qualified in that regard, he expressly, my question, admitted he's not an epidemiologist. So I think for him to opine about a University of Pittsburgh epidemiological PowerPoint, it's number one, corroborated, did have the expertise. It's not a published study. And number two, he doesn't have the expertise to qualify.
I could not opine to say, that's just a bit. What's the offer? Prop.
So there is an actual study. We wanted to provide this as a summary, but we can certainly provide the study. But the studies that he reviewed talk about health impacts. This study by Pitt and the Department of Health on health impacts from unconventional oil and gas development was something that he reviewed as part of his research into the studies that we just presented to him.
Access to the actual study.
Yes.
The studies are not published. They're not published in any peer review. They were handed out by the University of Pittsburgh at a meeting. They were put on the University of Pittsburgh website. They're not published studies. So that's number one. Number two is that we're here about the compressor station. We're here about a particular compressor station. We're not here, and it's not for the board to determine whether there's some overall health issue with respect to oil and gas development, which is what this would address. It would allow this.
Do you think the board should have access to?
That's not what the study addresses. The study does not address the impact of two oil and gas wells at the compressor station. This addresses a study of oil and gas development. And again, beyond that, it's not published anywhere on the website.
Let's do this. This issue. Pittsburgh. Pitt, PowerPoint. Say that it's just there's published critical study. That's how.
Thank you. And one other thing I'd like to know, thank you for that, we appreciate that, is that that study was also performed by the Department of Health, Pennsylvania Department of Health. So, Mr. Sweeney, do you want us to move on from this study? We covered it, okay.
Just clarification, we'll be back with your last at the April meeting. Right?
I agree with you, so.
Whatever that's.
Thank you.
And I have, we'll wait, I'll give you this exhibit at that meeting. So. Or if you want it now.
It's to be after.
Okay.
I heard it say there's no.
And next, sure, and we also, at the next meeting, will have a public health expert who will be able to help shed light on that, and probably more than Mr. Glass would on the Pitt Department of Health study. Okay. And thank you, Mr. Glass was just reviewing what could be relevant because of the study and the, fact of the study in Southwestern Pennsylvania. But we'll certainly move on. 1 second. And just a few more questions. Did you see anywhere in the application to discuss how the project will benefit the public health, safety, and welfare?
Objection, that's not a requirement.
That's not relevant to this issue. We have satisfied requirements of it's passed.
I just want to know, Mr. Sweeney, that will probably come up, in our next witness, because that was a statement Hyperion made in its application. That's all I'm saying. So, Mr. Glass, we're coming up to the end of your testimony for this month. You'll be back next time, but is there anything else you want to share with the board?
No, I just think, indication that it's just. We will have the effort to segregate these.
Thank you. It's will preserve, having you find your opinions, because you keep being called back, it's being continued. And so that's it for direct, right? Thank you.
One group to it. Said it's that.
Yes, please.
No objection, 11, 12, 13. Subject to cross-examination. Based on the email exchange that a couple of days ago, was my understanding that the cross-examination was deferred until Mr. Glass gets back in April. And I would just ask, there was a representation in those emails made that there was going to be a report forthcoming. So if there is to be a report forthcoming, I would just ask that perhaps we have agreement tonight on the date of that submission.
Sure. Let me ask Mr. Fox, but just what it looks like. Let's see. Okay. So 10 business days, is that okay? Sure. Okay. Mr. Sweeney, is that okay with you? 10 business days for a report, that's for report of events.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I just sort of, I thought I need trouble and heard there might be an issues with respect to April. I just wanted to know if we have an understanding that he is coming back in April.
It's the second week of April, his family vacation is the first week.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Just. Last. Or. 10 business days. Have a lot of businesses, so almost say.
Oh, yes, yes. You're all over to make full price. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Okay, right. Sorry. We're gonna change the one. Right. Also, the next 3 months. Everybody did it. Everybody finds that. Yeah, they don't want that. I know.
I think we're running to move on. Water. Everyone can come to order, the hearing to continue.
Yes, we call Ms. Jennifer Hoffman.
Yes, please. That's part of it.
Hi, Ms. Hoffman. Hi, we met at the yes. Thank you for being here tonight and answering questions. Can you say your name for
Jennifer Hoffman, JP.
and sign the application?
I did.
And in that signature, it talks about having general knowledge of the information contained in the application. Is that true?
Yes.
So going to the actual property itself, is it true that Bow and Arrow is the record owner of the property?
Yes.
And what is the relationship between Bow and Arrow and the Hiker?
Sure. Bow and Arrow is managed by Wilderness. It's a mineral land company.
And I apologize, but who do you work for right now? I didn't even get into your bio.
Sure. So I'm the vice president for human resources, environmental health, safety, regulatory, and communications for Olympus Energy. Hyperion is fully owned.
And what is the ownership relationship with Bow and Arrow?
Olympus manages that.
Who owns that?
It's a separate entity, but Olympus manages it.
What is that entity that's separate?
It's Bow and Arrow land.
Oh, I was saying who owns Bow and Arrow Band? It's
Bow
by
and Arrow.
itself. Okay, thank you. And so you're familiar with the property then, is that right?
I am.
And are you familiar with the owner, you're familiar with the ownership of the property? Are you aware of any deed restrictions on the property?
I believe that a couple of things. One is that, when you have a post-construction stormwater management, stormwater facility, there can be, since Bow and Arrow is the property, it's irrelevant. There is a,
I'm sorry, what's your property? Sorry.
the restriction itself, since it's the.
So there is a restriction.
For the, there's a restriction, I believe, for the police range. There's a police shooting range that is for the township.
And what is that restriction for the?
I don't know.
So that's. Mr. Sweeney, this was an exhibit that we had the last time, and I think we're to exhibit 14, is that right?
Actually, I had it. Six.
Oh, exhibit 6. You ever seen this document, Ms. Swanton?
I don't believe so.
You were provided with a copy of it after the last meeting when it was handed out?
I wasn't here.
You were provided with a copy by anyone?
I don't remember.
Is this? I'm gonna give you a moment to take a look at this and maybe you'll remember seeing it. Ms. Hoffman, when did you start being employed by Memphis?
I've been employed by Olympus since July of 2016.
And this date on this document is February of 2019. Do you agree with that? And did Bow and Arrow advise Hyperion that there was a restriction on the property?
I don't know.
Did Bow and Arrow ever notify Olympus that there was a key restriction on the property?
I don't.
So the restriction that is in place that you're aware of, is that documented?
I don't know.
So what is the restriction for?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm going to hand what is going to be, I think this is going to be exhibit number 14. 15. And this is also base number 19 in the application. I'm also going to have another exhibit. And this is also in the application, starting on page 276.
We identified space over here, and I think the board does. One particular tab. Oh, the capital page.
Sure. It's the compliance history first that was included with the
That's
special
that one.
exception. This is the compliance history that was included in the application for the ENS permit. For the ENS permit application, which was in the special exception application. Yep. Ms. Hoffman, do you recognize these documents?
I do.
And what are these documents?
The document that, I'm sorry, I don't know what exhibit, it's not marked.
I think it's exhibit
276.
yes. That is my second exhibit. 1 second. Mr. Sweeney, I apologize. So this is exhibit 15.
Table. Marking as. 276.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks for your patience. Can you please identify to the board what these documents are?
One is Olympus enforcement actions and penalties, and one is kind of an overview of violations in the description.
And so protecting, this is exhibit number 15, this is exhibit number
Okay.
15.
We're on the same page now.
So this is included with the special exception application, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then this list was provided with the ENS application to the DEP, is that correct?
That is a requirement of the ENS application.
And a copy of the ENS application was provided to the board together with the special exception application, is that right?
Correct.
So my question is, why are there only 6 on this list and 103 on this list?
Objective question, to the extent it characterizes. Items in this. Also.
5 of them are entries and I put it 16 by posted.
So an enforcement action can encompass a number of inspection records. What you're looking at here, you see how it has.
That's right, 2016, just before.
Yes, on,
Yeah.
on exhibit 16, you can see it says inspection ID on the side. An enforcement action can coalesce a number of specific inspections into one document that is then assessed.
So why are there more listed on exhibit 16 than on exhibit 15?
I just explained.
Okay. I'm sorry, it didn't quite.
There's violations.
Yes, one other thing to note is that not every, and this is a part of 16, right? There can be violations that are alleged by the department, that are never taken to a consensus.
How many consent assessments? How many consent assessments has a purpose been subject?
So that's the list,
So
that's a list in 15.
the only consent assessments that Olympus Energy has ever had is listed on exhibit 15.
That is correct.
What about civil penalties?
It's the same thing.
So let's then go through exhibit 16. I want to focus on a few that specifically deal with the Poseidon well site. And are you aware of the notices on the Poseidon to DTI pipeline, notices on this exhibit 16?
I am.
And what are those for?
Largely ENS issues during construction.
And
Sorry, ENS is erosion and sedimentation.
what were those issues?
Largely they were things like temporary stabilization, within the limit of disturbance, erosion drills caused by extreme rainfall within the limit of disturbance. Those types of things. RILS, RILS, so whenever you have an open construction project, and this is for any construction project, whenever you have a lot of rainfall, sometimes you can get kind of little troughs of dirt, little gullies of dirt. That the department will issue violations for this kind of things that are violations.
And you said we're mostly for ENS issues. What other issues were there?
I believe that they were all for ENS issues, and this was back in early 2019, so it's been about 5 years.
And what about the now, what about Olympus's notice of the violation in the last 5 years?
Objective form of the question.
I'll move on. Ms. Hoffman, on one of the violations on Poseidon on the ESG permit, I see here the erosion drills observed. I just want to go back to that really quickly on what happens when there's a break.
So, generally, it's due to a large amount of rainfall falling in a short amount of time and causing erosion of dirt. Like that's basically what it is.
And it says here that the wetland on site was undelineated. What does that mean?
Can you show me which one that is?
Sure, they're not numbered. I'll hand it to you, but if you number them, so it's on page. It's on page 5. And it's the sixth one down, I hope. This one. Yeah, it's on Bates page 280. And it's the sixth one down.
Wetland on site is undelineated. And again, this goes back to August of 2019, so you'll forgive me if it's a little easy, especially since we were not assessed a penalty for these alleged violations. If my memory serves me correctly, this is one that we actually went out to the pipeline with the department to look at that. What they were calling a wetland feature, and it was determined with their biologists and our biologists to not be wetland. So that's one of the issues that we see with this type of information, is it doesn't have follow-up information.
So what are the wetlands that surround this project?
A stream can be a wetland, so if you have a stream crossing, there can be a wetland associated with it. I'm not sure with this specific wetland where that is, but we do delineate every wetland within the LOD and then multiple accounts that.
And what would you say the LOD is for the compressor station and the gas well stations?
I don't.
So were you aware that the pending for the Guardian compressor station states that it will disturb 10.99 acres?
That sounds about
And then were you aware that the pending for the Poseidon stated that the project area and project category of energy storage, production, and transfer energy production, oil and gas and expansion of well field was listed as 227.63 acres?
I believe that's the entire process.
Okay. And
I don't have it in front of me, so I
And going back to the violations. Have there been any violations in the last 6 months?
Yes, there have been violations.
And what are those violations?
Just so we can have a clarification, that when we say violations, we refer to notice of violation.
Have there been any notices of violation in the last 6 months to Hyperion or this
There have been notice of violations.
to Hyperion
I do not believe
and to Olympus?
to discuss.
And what were those violations?
We had a spill on our Athena location. That whenever we were pulling up containment, after drilling operations there, we found some staining, and so we're doing that.
And have you applied for Act 2 on that still?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure.
And what is being done right now as remediation of that stuff?
It's really
What did that entail?
digging up some of the gravel on the location and disposing of it.
And did you do any testing of the soil, air, and water after the spill?
That's generally our process. I'm not sure if we did for that one. It's generally the process.
So now I want to move on to the acid producing rock that's discussed in the application. You reviewed the data and the information on acid producing rock, is that correct? And could you describe to the board what the application says about acid producing rock?
Sure, so, when there is the potential for, on a location, we are required, as part of the ESCGP process with the department, to develop a plan for managing those materials so that there's no impact, associated with basically disturbing those acid producing materials. DEP has approved our ESCGP for this location. And so they reviewed our plan and clearly reminded us since they approved the application.
So were you aware that Lions Run, that CEC, your consultant, is involved in restoration of Lions Run?
We have discussed Lions Run with, a local watershed association as well, so we are, familiar with it.
And which local watershed associations?
I don't recall.
And what were those discussions?
It was basically discussions about, potential partnerships in the future.
And were you aware that the application notes that some of the waterways that are near this project are impaired, some of the unnamed tributaries and Lions Run?
My understanding is that they are.
And which,
So basically, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is required to assess its streams throughout Pennsylvania. Sometimes they find that those streams are not meeting existing water quality standards, whether that's for actual water quality, whether that's for habitat, whether that's for aquatic fauna. And they will determine why those streams are impaired. So where Lions Run, my understanding is that it's siltation impaired. So we also have things like water management in the area. It's challenges.
and Mr. Sweeney, the DEP just published a 2020 report that identifies impaired. And some of them are so impaired that they're on the 303D list, but we'll get to that at some point. That is in the integrated water. And has Olympus encountered acid mine rock on its side and well side?
I don't.
And what is the plan if you do encounter, if Hyperion encounters acid mine?
So I believe that the recommendations that came out of the report, and generally what happens is you do one or two things. You neutralize it through addition of base, or you cut off the material.
And what is Hyperion's plan?
I believe that the recommendation for this site is a neutralization.
The recommendation.
The folks that developed that are planning.
Oh, your consultant, okay. And
Neutralize the acid.
what is that? What is that material that you mix with this acid?
I don't recall.
And are you aware with the DEP's recommendations on acid producing rocks?
They have lots of different recommendations. Acid producing rock.
This was included in the application. It's
Oh, they have like document.
right. I think we're up to 17 now. This was included in the application.
Yeah. They have a fact sheet that helps guide operators on how to manage acid producing rock formations, and not just oil and gas, any of those to construction.
Do you know what the DEP's number one recommendation is?
Off the top of my head, now.
Avoidance? And then the next recommendation, are you aware of actually what the next one? It's actually something you said, following it off.
Right.
So in this case, is it true that Hyperion can't avoid impacting acid producing rock?
So my understanding is the location was designed to avoid to the extent practicable. And then with the way that this pad is designed itself, that there was mining on that location for the extent. And clearly the department approved the project.
So with respect to the strip mining, so the project, the property is located over top of strip mine areas, is that right? And with respect to hauling it away, is that an option that Hyperion could investigate if the board said instead of mixing it with other things, we don't know what you're mixing it with? Instead, can you collect it and haul it away? That would actually help the pollution in the area.
I don't know that it necessarily would help the pollution in the area, especially if you're just neutralizing the material itself.
What does neutralization mean?
Taking the material from an acidic standard into a neutral standard.
And what's left after that? Just a neutral state where it's as if the acid mine rock is never there, or they're still going to be?
So they actually, the Pennsylvania DP does this on a number of locations when they're restoring strip mines. It's practice of the department.
So going back to my question, the board conditioned the approval on Hyperion hauling the acid producing rock away. Is that something Hyperion could be willing to
I'm
do?
going to object to this question. Witnesses testified, this is an issue that's addressed. Like, it's not something that's within the domain of this work under applicable standards.
So going back to CEC's CEC's opinion on the materials that were encountered in previously strip mine locations, would you agree that they said they should be handled and managed in accordance with the PAT fact sheet?
I'm sure that was the recommendation. I do not have it.
And you obviously were here for Mr. Glass's testimony, and you said you're the vice president of health and safety. And are you aware of the University of Pittsburgh Department of Health studies that were performed?
Objection, I don't think she did the back work through this witness, but she couldn't get it.
Protect PT though should have the ability to ask the vice president of health and safety about studies that she may or may not be aware of.
Decision.
If we can then ask to recall Ms. Hoffman, depending on the outcome of that.
We would object to that. It's the construction.
Here's the question.
I am.
That's what.
You are.
I am.
And what did those studies,
I just said it up. Got your question.
okay, so, and I'm sorry,
Get that information to Mr. Glass. Those things.
so,
And I would just note for the record, the reported reason for calling Ms. Hoffman is that she signed the application. There, we asked questions about that. The PIT study had nothing to do with the application, so it's beyond the scope of relevance. It's not just that's what
It's, operatives is they want to show through Mr. Bass that public health aspects of the University of Pittsburgh study. should- Yeah. It's public information. Sure, do that as you.
And I'm gonna grab the application so you can see it without trying to check what it says. I've highlighted a portion here, we're on base page number 6. So, Ms. Hoffman, can you, and you sign this, is your date of signing, can you read the paragraph that's at the top?
Sure, it's the narrative, brief narrative. The proposed compressor station is an oil and gas operation permitted by special exception in the industrial IC and mineral extraction overlay (MEO) zoning districts in which the subject property is located. The proposed use meets applicable requirements of the zoning ordinance and will benefit the public health, safety, and welfare. Additional detail regarding the project is provided in the project area.
So I'd like to ask about how this project benefits the public health, safety, and welfare, which is stated in the document that you saw.
Sure. It is, you know, Mr. Sweeney's already said, it's not a requirement of the ordinance that it benefits, right? But, in my perspective, experience perspective, there's a couple of ways. One is that, natural gas development, helps improve national security. Two is that in Pennsylvania, since shale gas development, really started, and grew, shale natural gas has kind of removed coal a little bit from the electricity generation in Pennsylvania, actually reducing CO2 levels by about 40%, emissions by about 40%. Three is that this compressor station would serve the Olympus's operations in Penn Township. And the Poseidon and Metis and Gaia wells have provided about 20 million in royalties to our landowners since they started. And for Penn Township itself, has received just in the last 5 years from the impact fees associated with oil and gas development, somewhere over $300,000 that they can then use for things like infrastructure, emergency response, public safety, those kinds of things.
And so those, many of those that you discussed are financial benefits. Now, what about the public health?
Well, a few of them are financial benefits, but they also apply to public health. You know, if a municipality is getting impact fees, they can use those funds for things like emergency preparedness that directly improve the health and safety of the township residents.
And you're also the vice president of health and safety, is that correct?
That's right.
So with respect to the application where it identifies specific chemicals that will be used on the property, have first responders been provided with lists with including trade secret chemicals?
So, yes, so they are provided with MSDS. We also do training with the first responders for all of our municipalities. In fact, we just did a training for Penn Township first responders a few weeks ago.
So that list of all the chemicals, including the trade secret chemicals,
So we cannot provide trade secret.
Did you provide them to first responders?
They are provided, separately, they don't come directly from us.
How do first responders get that information?
It's through the Pennsylvania DEP.
And so the first responders who will be, if there is an emergency at the site, will know each and every single potential harm that may come to them.
That's my understanding.
Now, the application doesn't talk about radioactivity. So how would first responders know that there could be a radiation issue if it's not disclosed?
So there's no requirement related to radioactivity, or any kind of disclosure. It's not a chemical used, in our processes. We do surveys for NORM, and we develop radioactivity action plans whenever there's drill cuttings, for example, that are being processed.
And so there are drill cuttings being
No, it's not.
generated on the site.
It's not a compressor station.
No, but on the property side. The use of the property is under review to see if this compressor station is suitable on the use of the property as a whole. So on the property as a whole, there are drill cuttings that are being produced and generated, correct?
And
I would object, there's elements, this application deals with the proposed Guardian compressor station, not an existing well pad on, as witnesses noted, a very large several hundred acre tract. Or to make its own assessment based on the view that was taken as to the spatial relationship between the two. But we just, this is not right.
In addition to that, there's issues about potential.
So what is your understanding of the health impacts that come from the compressor station?
Objective. The objective question is being not related to this.
Operators. Health hazards.
Well, I'd like to say that these firms aren't identified in the application, so I'd like the board to be able to identify the harms that would come with this project. And the statement in the very beginning says it will benefit public health, safety, and welfare. How do we know that if we don't know what the harms are?
She's explained what that's. That's not there. You should consider it's not.
Might be it. Now, I just would like to reserve my objections to that the vice president of health and safety isn't going to answer questions about health and safety. I just want to preserve that objection.
No.
Thank you. And my follow-up question, what are health impacts from compressor stations? I think that that's relevant to that statement.
The actual facility, talk about the processes. that.
That's all.
I think, yes.
Just briefly, the top of first, let's go to exhibit 15. This is penalty. Of the six. Penalties that are either, they're categorized as either that's set, that assessment or civil penalty or civil penalty assessment. Correct. Of those six, how many dealt with that? And one dealt with pipelines.
That's correct.
Have all of these matters been resolved now to the satisfaction of DEP?
They have.
Respect to the, you were asking questions about the, well, added there,
Yes,
that again, that was also a well added.
that was one well pad and it was constrained to the actual pad site.
With respect to exhibit 16. When the term violation is used, I think it's clear, those are actually notices of violation, is that correct?
That's correct.
In other words, they're allegations by DEP, they're not necessarily findings.
That is correct.
We're asked questions about benefits. Open it up here.
Objection.
Careful, because if you open the door, then you're gonna have trouble.
It's different. I don't have any other.
I have a question. How many compressor stations?
So right now, we're in the permitting stage and construction stage for compressor station. We have one that is currently being constructed in Rural Township. We have one that is permitted in Elizabeth Township. We have another one that is permitted through the local process in West Deer Township. And then we have another one beyond. None are operational currently.
That's all I have.
No, that's all. Thank you, Ms. Hoffman, for being.
Any questions?
That's.
Yes. And for next month, I wanted to give thank you for your patience on us, compiling our experts. But next month, we're going to be calling, we have 4 witnesses plus now, Mr. Glass. We'll have an expert witness on emergency preparedness, an air expert, health impacts, and a sound expert, in addition to Mr. Glass. So we'll try to get through those as quickly as possible.
As we've said in the past, it helps the board and the applicant to have books. So that's trouble.
Yeah,
I'm asking you to have.
we will.
We have those, I mean,
Not
this is,
today.
this is a point of contention because it was Council for Protect PT that initially broached the notion of the parties identifying witnesses and experts reports. All our experts reports were actually in our application. Since then, we've gotten promises that expert reports are going to be coming, and to the detriment of my client, and I think to the board, we haven't seen one yet. So we would ask that any experts who have testified, whether it would be next month or hopefully not much longer past that, those experts report be provided to us and the board 2 weeks in advance of the hearing date. electronic mail, right? It's-
Yes.
Okay, I understand that. Now, I do also understand that Hyperion and Olympus are comfortable here that they've been before the board before. We haven't, we just asked for communication with us. We're not intentionally doing any gamesmanship with respect to reports. So we appreciate the interest in that.
Dominating.
Absolutely, so, yes.
If we put one other request, if we could identify the order that these experts are going to testify in, because given how this proceeding is gone, I would be shocked if we were to get through 4 experts in one night.
Yeah, why don't you just take care of it? Patience.
This is our first night of our facing sheet, so this is just the very beginning. Thank you.
Hearing is continued until next month. Next month meeting as mentioned is April 11th. Thank you, everybody.